Today, we're joined by Dr. Marc Bubbs, performance nutritionist working with professional and Olympic athletes, including national team environments. Today, we're talking about fueling development, recovery, and longevity in the modern game. Welcome to the Soccer Ladder.
Amazing, Megan. I appreciate you carving me on. And it's a small world running into previous guests there that you've had on.
I'm telling you, the soccer world is so small and so connected. I don't know. I love it. It's awesome. But yeah, how crazy is that?
It's so fun.
For those who may not know your journey, how did you go from nutrition to becoming a trusted performance voice in elite sport?
Yeah, well, I guess if zoom out to 30,000 feet here, I was into sport growing up, played at a decent level, but not the level that gets you to professional sport. And so, like a lot of folks, you think, how can I stay connected with this? And I had some struggles with getting sick and run down and tired along my career, sort of high school, college. And then that really clued me up into nutrition and training. And this was in like the late 90s, early 2000s when this stuff was, sort of real brand new. I wanted to go down the traditional route for medicine, but just felt the calling for I'd had a nutritionist that really had a huge impact on changing my health and supporting my health. And so putting those pieces together of okay, I think how we fuel and how we move and training, these are really big rocks, right? These are big signals to improve, our overall health, how we look, feel, perform. And then of course the same as you go down that road and you become more and more you keep pursuing your training and get really at the tip of the spear that leads you into pro sport. So it's been tremendous the last 20 years working with professional athletes in all the major leagues, Olympians. Work with Canada Basketball as the director of nutrition, and then also work on the clinical side with the rest of us, moms and dads, and busy people trying to perform in their own lives. And so there's certainly differences with professional athletes and the rest of us, but there's a lot of similarities too, right? And so that's I think that's helps folks to realize that.
When you first stepped into pro team environments, what surprised you most about how seriously performance and recovery were treated?
Well, I've been at this a minute, so I'd have to say when I first stepped in, I was probably more surprised that they weren't treated more seriously, right? And it depends on the sport that you're in. So certain sports that are high skill sports, like soccer or basketball, you can go a really long way without ever really thinking about your nutrition or your training previously. Whereas sports like American football, rugby, ice hockey, training is baked into the cake. You sort of have to get to a certain size to even be able to compete in the sport. And so traditionally those sports will have a bit better compliance, right? What we call like people, listening to what they're being asked to do and actually doing it. Um, and certainly endurance sport as well. But over the years, that's improved, right? That's gotten better and better. And so you do see obviously athletes taking things seriously with regards to performance and recovery, but it's also just human nature, right? If you're 6'8" with a 44-inch vertical leap and can run like the wind, you're not always trying to optimize or mine every last gain because you're pretty darn good. I think where the rubber starts to meet the road is that only lasts for so long, right? Like as your career goes into your now you're getting into your late 20s. If you're having fast food all the time post game, if you're not putting the lifts in, if you're not doing your mobility work, if you're not taking care of your health, that catches up to you. And so this is where people, you can't father time's undefeated. And so that's really where you start to see a big difference. And I think the great thing now is that younger athletes are building the right habits at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 to be able to set themselves up for success rather than even in my generation, people would wait until they were athletes in their 30s, late 30s, and then say, okay, now I want to add some things to my repertoire. It's like, okay, we can still help you, but we would have had a lot more success if we started, you know, 15 years ago.
My son is 12. Is this the age where he wants to start focusing on nutrition? Because it's still a struggle.
Yeah, I think it's always like it's playing the long game, right? Because I think if we push too hard with anything, as we know as parents, I've got three girls at home, 12, 9, and 7, so I get it. It's there's always some kind of challenge. Um, so you do want to play the long game. And the most important thing for young athletes is, well, for anybody, is total energy, right? The total calories that go in. And what we underappreciate, especially because in the general population, we're struggling with, you know, overweight, obesity at 2/3 of the population struggling with that. Childhood obesity is on the rise as well. And so it gets difficult when we look at the research and a youth soccer player is expending like 3,000 calories a day and they're 12 years old. Like that's actually a lot of fuel that needs to go in the tank. And if we don't get sufficient fuel, if we go back to this notion of signals, that's the loudest signal that allows the body to build, adapt, and grow stronger. And when you talk about kids, they're literally growing, not just growing in a sense of adapting. And so that has additional total energy needs. And so that's definitely the biggest thing when we talk about kids is getting enough fuel in. And it can be tricky because sometimes simple rules like too much sugar is bad for you is a good simple rule, but it oversimplifies things, which we can double click on that if you like. But that's one where we definitely need to get enough fuel in for kids to thrive, not just on the pitch, but in terms of their growth and maturation, and also in the classroom. Because if they don't have enough fuel, then it's tough to think as sharply as well.
I feel like things are getting serious younger and younger, and it's long days. It's long days for the kids now. Yeah, like school to academy, and then, we get home late, and then it's schoolwork and it's bed.
And it makes it hard to actually get time to fuel, right? Because there's not these huge windows to like, okay, let's make a whole meal from scratch and et cetera, et cetera. There's these small windows between driving and dropping off and then classroom, they're back to back to back, and then it's a quick lunch. And so when you start working with youth athletes, you quickly realize there's not a lot of feeding opportunities in the day. And if we think of it like a big bucket, we've got to fill that whole bucket up with fuel to be able to again adapt and perform and feel our best. And so that in and of itself presents challenges. But there's lots of different strategies on how we help younger athletes do that.
Yeah. So what would be like you're saying, like we have very limited windows. So let's say between school and driving to like to our academy practice, what would you recommend as a snack or I don't know, even I guess a meal?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways of thinking about things, I try to get people away from even using some of the terms like sugar because it already has its own connotation to it. And so we want to think of carbohydrates like fast carbohydrates, as in you eat them and the energy gets to you into the muscles quickly, right? So simple sugars, right? You consume them, they get through the stomach quickly, they absorb quickly. And of course, if we're sitting in a classroom or if we're having those before bed, not a good idea for those fast carbohydrates. Um, but the term fast helps because if you're driving to a practice or you're in a practice or you just finished practice, even kids can get like, okay, fast is what I want right now. And that helps to take a lot of the prejudgment off of things because we might give things that look a bit more like that have more sugars in them, right? So if a kid's going to have a treat or a more carbohydrates based treat, even things like gummy bears, we have NBA players taking like that's the time to take it because it's going to be taken up into the system quickly, and then that individual is actually still hungry half an hour later. So it gets really difficult because in the general population, that's almost the complete opposite message we're giving, right? We want you to have slow carbohydrates, so complex carbs, they digest slowly, they keep you full so you can sit at your desk. And so this is always the paradox that we're kind of dealing with because it's a completely different set of rules, right? Context is always driving the strategies. And so this is one that's always the toughest for parents because it is very different from how they might eat.
Yeah.
In terms of fast carbohydrates, fruit is also a fast carbohydrate. So that's a great source for kids to be having. Super easy to store, to pack with you, or even dried fruit, right? Like dates, mangoes, all that kind of stuff is fantastic because it's very portable, and then helps to provide those fast absorbed carbohydrates.
What separates athletes who last 10 to 15 years from those who don't?
The best athletes, and in this case, the athletes that last the longest, are the ones that build good patterns and rhythms, right? We often call those habits now, but really, I prefer the term patterns and rhythms because it just becomes your how you function. You don't even think about it, right? If you imagine, you might be too young to drive at the minute, but for those who can drive, when you sit in a car, you don't think about putting your seatbelt on, right? You literally the act of getting in the car triggers the brainstem, the unconscious part of the brain, to you just reach over, grab it, click it, and off you go. Right? It requires no thinking at all. And so what we're always trying to do with clients, and this is the same in the general population with the moms and dads and executives I work with, as well as the athletes, is we're trying to build these systems in so they just become what you do, right? You're not following like this is what I need for breakfast and this is what I need for lunch, which, in the short term, we all do that. We need a roadmap to be able to get us there, but we want it to become reflexive, like second nature. And so the athletes who last 10 or 15 years really start to double down on that. And you see it. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with some of the best athletes like, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Sidney Crosby, Josie Altidores, Anthony Joshua's. These are people that are constantly repeating things over and over and really getting granular. And I think that's a great message, because in the general population, oftentimes clients will say, "Yeah, no, I'm doing that," or "I've heard of that." And you're like, "Okay, well, tell me about your sleep, or what time you get to bed, or tell me about your," like, let's drill down a little bit deeper to really find out what's going on, because those, again, what I call the big rocks or big buckets, these are the things that provide 80% of the benefit, right? And so it's not enough to kind of just have heard about it or be doing it a little bit. You want to keep revisiting it over and over. We see that now. It's not soccer, but in a lot of sports like golf, Scotty Scheffler's the best golfer in the world. He literally works on his grip every session, which he has this device that he uses that beginners would use, and he would have been laughed off the range 10 or 15 years ago, but he realized that was so important. And then, like anything, now you got more of these professional golfers doing the same thing and really, mastering what we call mastery of the fundamentals. And so that would be the big thing to keep building those patterns.
Since you mentioned Anthony Joshua, I asked the question to Chef Dan Machman. I had him on. I don't know if you know this, but I'm vegan. So I asked him the question if he thought someone like Anthony Joshua could be the athlete he is, or, have the significance he does if he was a vegan. So I wanted to hear like your answer on that too.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that all these different diets are just strategies, right? They're like different clubs in your golf bag, so to speak, or different notes on a guitar. The rules of how, you know, a golf ball flies, or how you create music, is always the same. So the principles are the same. In social media and in the media world, we kind of over focus on strategy. Like, this diet's better than this diet, eat this food better than that food. But the rules are always the same. So when we look at things like protein intake, like we would ensure if you're a vegan athlete that you have a certain amount of protein, because there's less leucine, which is this key amino acid that triggers muscle protein synthesis. We'd make sure that you have more protein at certain meals, right? We cover our bases. Sometimes you can have more fiber on that type of diet, which is, again, great for the general population. Sometimes not always the best for, let's say, a big boxer who needs to eat 4,500 calories. Like, if you have loads of heads of broccoli in your stomach, you're just not full. You're too full. So there's little things like that you would do, but people can use any type of strategy. The big thing where the rubber meets the road is, what is the thing the person will repeat? And oftentimes that marries up with what the person likes, right? Like, the person likes to be vegetarian or vegan, or the person likes to eat some meat, or the person, and so finding that balance. And there's always going to be pros and cons in whatever strategy people choose. And a great coach will always then, lean into the pros to make sure that the person's really getting the benefit of that strategy, but then also make sure the blind spot, right? Like the potential pitfalls, those are being covered. And a good coach will do that for you.
I struggle getting enough protein being a vegan, but have you worked with any like plant-based or vegan athletes?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been at this a while. So even before I was vegan in university, this is like the mid to late '90s, and there was none of the fake meats or any of that kind of stuff around. So you had to go like beans and lentils and rice, and um, so there's lots of prep involved. But I think from protein sources, I mean, beans and lentils are tremendous. I think people can struggle a little bit sometimes on the GI side, so soaking them can be great. Obviously, using digestive enzymes can be a big help as well. Because I think for a lot of folks who kind of just get into it, that can be a limiting factor. And it does take a few weeks to kind of habituate yourself and get used to it and digest those a little bit better. And so I think that can help folks tremendously. Just getting all the plants in is massive, right? So all the polyphenols, vitamins, minerals, you're getting a great dose with a plant-based vegan diet. And so oftentimes we're trying to marry up those some of those elements to somebody who has an omnivore diet, right? And so you're kind of borrowing strategies from even like vegan chefs because they make vegetables taste amazing. So you're like, okay, let's use some of those recipes for these folks. Some of the NFL players that I work with, or EPL over here in the UK, we're using some of those strategies because a lot of these guys are quite young, right? If you're 19, 20, 21, 22, you're not always, especially for boys, you're not always the best vegetable eater. And so if we can find ways to make those taste a little nicer, then we certainly use them.
For a 12 to 14-year-old academy player training 4 to 6 days a week, what's the biggest fueling mistake you see?
Hands down, it's just not getting enough fuel in, and that's under fueling. And so what I would suggest to young athletes and parents is always first think of the gameplay and then move outwards. And that means that what are we taking in pre-practice? So can it be something like peanut butter and jelly sandwich? We use oftentimes like things like applesauce, even with athletes if it's close to the time. What are they taking in during practice? So can we get, simple at home electrolyte drinks you can make, right? A couple tablespoons of honey, half a squeeze of lemon, right? Less than a quarter teaspoon of salt. And now you've made yourself, an at home sport drink that's probably better than 85% of the ones that are out there.
Yes, wait, hold on, repeat this. I love that.
Yeah, so honey is a great source of carbohydrate. We've got data to show that it prevents a lot of the hypoglycemic responses, which means like you take simple sugars in, they come in too fast, and then you sort of bonk and get this low. And so honey is a great source. So you might take 2 tablespoons, it's about 30 grams of carbohydrate, and that you would adjust that based on the athlete. The older you might get up to 45 or 60. You're going to mix that in a liter of water. And again, you might have to just put it in some warm water to start with because the honey will melt better. Half a squeeze of lemon. That citrate in the lemon helps to absorb the sodium, right? And so you can use table salt if you want. Sea salt's great as well. You get some extra minerals, but a quarter of a teaspoon of sea salt, and you're looking at, around, let's say about 600 milligrams of sodium. So for a younger athlete, you might even have to get that less than that. You want to get to 300 or so as your typical sports drink. So, a couple of pinches of salt, and you're off and running, and that provides the fuel during the session. And then as you get towards the end of the session, this is again, we talked about dried fruit, a really nice one. They're medjool dates, those thick, chunky, juicy dates. They have about, 16 grams to 30 grams of carbohydrates, depending on the size. And so if you're having, four dates, that'll get you up towards 60 to 70 grams of carbohydrates post practice. And then the best part is, the young athlete will still be hungry for dinner, which I know blows us away as parents. It's like, wait a minute, you just ate. Now we're coming home and now you're eating again. But that's actually a good thing if you're listening in, mom and dad, because that's the level of fuel that has to go back in to be able to support all that movement.
Knowing my son, he probably would just like turn his nose to dates. So, like, what is something else they could have besides dates?
Yeah, again, I think dried fruit's a great place to start. I think if again, I try to remove value judgments of foods away. Like this is a good food, this is a bad food. Again, if we get back to this like fast and slow, like if your kid's going to have a treat, then post practice is great because we're replenishing a lot of the fuels that just went in. So again, if it's gummy bears or some ice cream or whatever they want to have, like that's a moment to be able to put that in, and that whether it's post practice or in that meal. Chocolate milk's a classic one because you're getting the protein from milk, which is one of the gold standards. The chocolate part of it's just bringing on more carbohydrate than a regular milk, right? And so again, these can be super helpful for athletes to meet the proteins, the carbs, the total calories. But I'll repeat it again. It is really tough for people to put that mental switch because it's not what you'd prescribe somebody who's 20 or 30 pounds overweight, who's in their 40s or 50s, who has high blood sugars, high blood pressure, right? So that's always the disconnect for a lot of folks. But it's a game changer for kids because if they don't get enough fuel, then they get the low mood, struggling, sick, colds and flus all the time, struggling with concentration. They won't grow as quickly as well. As you probably know, like kids will have this growth phase. And if in that phase they're not fueling up enough, they can miss out on maximizing that growth phase. And so we do want to see, enough fuel in the tank.
What does a proper match day fueling timeline look for a young soccer player?
Well, it works well. I mean, soccer's interesting in that the game times change a lot, even in the pros, right? In the Premiership over in England, you can have noon, you can have 3, you can have 8. Whereas in North America, we're often used to, basketball or whatnot, football. The game times are evening most of the time. Yeah, so pre-game, 3 to 4 hours before the game, you want to have a good sized meal, right? And so you want to have a portion of protein about the size and thickness of your palm. So if you're a kid, then it's the size and thickness of your palm. I work with some NBA players, obviously 7 feet tall. Their palms are as big as your face, so they would have a lot more on the plate. From there, half your plate's covered in carbohydrates. So whether that's rice or pasta or potatoes or bread, whatever you prefer, get that on there. And then when it comes to things like vegetables, this is not the time to go with like the broccolis and the really fiber dense ones. We want that food to be able to digest quite quickly and smoothly. And so this is where you could have, vegetables like bell peppers or tomatoes or some leafy greens. Or if you had a picky kid, this would be the meal where you wouldn't really fight that battle. You just sort of give them their protein, their starch, and you might have a juice as well alongside that if you want to provide a bit more of the colors help to get the vitamins and the minerals and what we call polyphenols, these plant compounds that help with inflammation. So that can be a nice way. So that's about 3 hours before, and then an hour before, you're thinking a piece of fruit, banana, apple, orange, that type of thing. And then depending on the kid, even 15 minutes before, you could have some liquid nutrition, a few sips of a sport drink or whatnot. But that might depend on the individual and depend if they're playing in a tournament or whatnot. Because as you get really close to the game, then there is, the gut factor in a sense of some athletes will feel a bit more cramping and various things if they consume too much. And so, typically the younger athletes figure that one out pretty quick for themselves of like what they feel best in. But that's a nice way to do it. And again, post game is a great time to really fuel up. And so, it's not just dinner, but that's a great time to be having dessert because that combines with the meal. And we're not getting that big blood sugar response, and we're just bringing on board more total energy, which is the big signal that helps them to recover and adapt.
Growth spurts and academy training loads. What should parents be aware of nutritionally?
Yeah, I think it might sound like we're beating the same drum here, but it is basically total energy is massive. And so to be able to provide a bit more context, we're trying to establish meal frequency is a big part of that, right? And it sounds obvious, but if you only eat 2 or 3 meals in a day, then it's hard to get a lot of calories in versus if you eat 5 or 6 meals. When I say meal, that could be a snack as well. It's any feeding opportunity, right? And to give you an example, let's say you miss a meal a day, or even a meal and a snack, that's about 500 calories. So now we're talking 3,500 for a week, 7,000 every couple of weeks, 14,000 a month, 160,000 calories in a year, right? And now we're like, well, wait a minute, I'm tired, I'm sick, and I'm not growing as well. And it does become a little obvious when you start to put these numbers together for folks to just go, wow, that's pretty impactful. And again, want to reinforce like you want to have your main meals. Obviously, you're using complex carbohydrates, like healthy source of whole grains with the breads, the pastas, the rices. We're trying to get as many different sources of protein. I know that's not easy with kids. When it comes to protein, we tend to think of what we call the 3 T's. So the total protein for the day, the timing, spreading it out through the day, and then the types. And that means, it's some red meat, some chicken, some fish, eggs and dairy, some plant-based. So trying to get from different buckets, because as you do that, you really expand the micronutrition, right? Your ability to get all the various micronutrients from the different types. And I mean, you've got kids at home, so I don't have to tell you, typically fish and seafood are the buckets that are the trickiest. So just trying to find ways of getting those in. Salmon is one of the least fishy tasting ones that can be a nice one to start with. But there's some other meaty white fish like monkfish or cod that can also be, masked with different curries and spices and things like that that can be helpful as well. Especially you had Chef Dan on, right? He can
Oh, yeah.
great at preparing meals and being able to, hide things. And
I just need one of you guys in my life to like help us figure it all out.
that's, I mean, how I work we work with chefs. And so with working with even a guy like AJ, we would do the performance nutrition in the background, crunch all the numbers, and then you're able to execute via someone like a Chef Dan, who then can make everything taste fantastic. And it takes the pressure off the athlete to be doing a lot of the calculating. So yeah, certainly, I wish for the rest of us we could do that, right? It's like, yeah, exactly. Sign me up.
How important is like supplements?
Yeah, I think certain supplements we want to think of more as just portable nutrition. So things like a protein powder, you almost want to think of that just like a convenient portable nutrition rather than even just a supplement because it's a way of getting that protein in when you can't, again, be baking a salmon or cooking up some chicken, etc. Omega 3s would fall into that category for me as well. Kids struggle to get those in. And so, a supplement is going to be a convenient way of getting a food source. From there, you're getting your micronutrition in, so all the key vitamins and minerals, some of the plant compounds. This is where a really solid multivitamin is super helpful, right? It covers all your bases. Again, kids are not just busy with their training, but they're busy at school, and then they're also still growing. And so it's a huge insurance policy. So that's certainly one that I would recommend athletes take as well.
So I have a dumb question. Are gummy multivitamins as good as regular?
It's a little tricky. The trouble is if they're not NSF or if they're not informed for sport, you don't know exactly what you're getting. And the sad part is that, unfortunately, with the barriers of entry for supplements so low, you get these gummies, and we've had loads of research now to show like the creatine gummy actually has like less than a gram of creatine in it, or the one that has this vitamin, they analyze it and it's got half as many. So if you do get gummies, then you certainly want to get NSF versions. I actually built my own. We even just have a startup company here called ProBio where we built our own liquid form. Right? We've been in with teams for the last 18 months, some of the biggest teams in the world, best athletes in the world, and now we're out to consumer. And so that's again a way of just a super easy kind of drinkable format that then makes it easier for people to be consistent with. And so gummies can be great like that for kids. You just want to make sure that you get again a gummy from a company that has that in America would be the NSF, because then you just can be confident that you're getting what you're paying for.
Go back to your line.
Yes, yes. So ProBio,
Yeah, yeah. So can like an everyday person like me order it?
absolutely. So it's all built on this sort of human first model, which is basically if we could support the person, right? Even if they're a professional athlete of the rest of us, they can then train, adapt, and perform their best, right? The research, as we looked into it in the last 10 years, just shows that, frequency of illness, you could basically separate out the elite, the most elite performers from the rest of us. So you've probably heard the term like the best ability is availability. Well, it's the same for parents, right? It's tough to perform your best when you're tired and run down and sick from all the running the kids around and work and everything else. And so we built it to be able to support, both those groups. And yeah, the feedback's been tremendous. We're in with some of the fastest runners in the world, whether it's 100 meters up to marathon. We've got more than 40 teams taking it, some of the best athletes. And so the feedback's been great. And only just since November, we've gone out to the general public. Yeah, so we'll definitely, yeah, we'll send some over to you, Meg. It would be great for you to try some out. And super simple, tangy orange taste. Then we have an unflavored as well that you can mix in with a, smoothie, protein shake. And again, for kids, we typically would give like half a dose for anybody who's 13 and over.
We just randomly fell on this. I didn't know you had your own line. I'm so glad this came up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, we just got some funding as well this past fall. So it's all athlete owned, practitioner built. So it's going to be, yeah, a lot of exciting things coming down the pipeline here in 2026.
Okay, well, I definitely want to try it for myself and then of course for Liam. There's so much info online, supplements, protein trends, recovery gadgets. How should families filter what actually matters?
It's a great question. And the challenge is always what we're seeing online isn't really reflective of what's happening in sport. So I'll give you an example. I wrote a book maybe 8, 9 years ago now called Peak. It was a deeper dive into performance. This is on the nutrition side. It made some waves in pro sport. But those fundamentals, and we always talk about mastery of the fundamentals. So we talk about things like protein intake. Virtually nothing's changed in the last 10 years in terms of how much protein you need, the right amounts. If you were to go online, you would think, wow, there's been so many things happening in the last 12 months. I mean, protein is everywhere, creatine's everywhere, but nothing's actually changed. I mean, it's great that people are more aware, but it does make it difficult because for the two examples I gave, those are effective things. And so the awareness was a good thing for people, and then they can adopt it into their own regimes. The challenge is we always get these, what I call sizzle, right? It's like things that are marketing claims, things that are buzzwords that only last, like lighting a match for a couple of months or maybe a year. And then we realize in the research that it doesn't actually have the impact and it goes away. And that can really be exhausting for people to just keep following all these trends. And so I think this is where, you know, to the question that, your son posed, it's like really double down on the fundamentals. What are the really important things, right? So it's like get your total protein in, get the amount of carbohydrates that you need for the individual. And for kids, that can be like 5 or 6 grams to even 7 grams per kilogram. So that's a lot of carbohydrate. Get the total energy right, right? In terms of your sleep, make sure we're having sufficient time for sleep, right? 8 hours for a kid is what we're aiming for, not always easy. In terms of the training plan, right? Following the coach with the training plan, but those are the things that really move the needle. You're going to get 85, 90% of the way there. And then that's when we can start exploring some of the potential kind of trendy things that come down and see if they actually apply. Oftentimes, it's again less. It's well, I said like a lot of sizzle, but not a lot of substance.
I could talk to you for hours on this topic. Oh my gosh. But I think it's very important for the young players today, especially at my son's age where they're 12 to 13. And this is the time,
And it's great. There's so many great role models now, like whether it's the Ronaldos or etc., that are taking care of their bodies. They're eating all the right things. I mean, sometimes some of the strategies get a little bit, when we're getting red light beds and everything else, like we don't need that for the youth athletes, right? We just need good quality sleep. Um, but yeah, doubling down on all those are massive. And then with all the metrics that we use to collect information now from people and from athletes, still the best thing is subjective wellness. So just asking the person or the young athlete, like, how do you feel? Scale of 1 to 10. And so that's a really nice thing for parents as well, because even with clients, whether it's the watches, the rings, all this data that we're collecting, it can create a lot of noise. And I think for parents, it's nice to know that just, asking your kid how they're doing, how they feel, or for coaches is a really great way of gauging. Because if they're telling you I'm a 5 out of 10, okay, well maybe we need to, double check nutrition and this week and make sure we're getting enough sleep and those types of things.
Thank you so much for your time. You are like a wealth of information.
Well, listen, I appreciate you carving out the time and having me on as well. Great to meet, and it's amazing that we have some familiar faces in the circle as well.
I know. It's a crazy small world